Ulug' Rabbim icabet kıl, Yirakta ana duasını. Ulug' Rabbim icabet kıl, Zindanda ata duasını. Ulug' Rabbim icabet kıl, Musafir yetim duasını. Ulug' Rabbim icabet kıl, Vatansiz g'arib duasını. Ulug' Rabbim nasib ayla, Ko'rishga vatan azodini. Ulug' Rabbim nasib ayla, Ko'rishga zolim zavolini. Ulug' Rabbim nasib ayla, Ko'rishga onam jamolini. Ulug' Rabbim nasib ayla, Suyishga vatan tuprog'ini. Ulug' Rabbim nasib ayla, Kezishga vatan gulbog'ini. Ulug' Rabbim nasib ayla, Vatan tuprog'ida o'lishni.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers and sisters, we have another very special episode on Talk is Turkestan. We have heard about China's surveillance on the Uyghurs, whether it be CCP officials living with Uyghurs, or whether it be the surveillance cameras within the homes of the Uyghurs, or talking about the various social media, quote unquote social media apps. There's nothing really social about them except to spy on the Uyghurs. As you've seen in the ad, I've gotten with me an expert who can talk to us about, we're going to delve into deeply this specific topic, and we're going to be focusing on this article, which was written by Yael Grauer. Now, Yael Grauer is a tech journalist and investigative reporter. She covers online privacy and security, digital freedom, hacking, and mass surveillance. She has written for Ars Technica, The Intercept, Wired, Motherboard, Slate, and many others. I believe if anyone wants to talk about this topic, she's the perfect person for this. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Yael to Talk is Turkestan. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, thank you so much for giving up your time in sharing your expertise on this very important issue. I mean, we talk about China's surveillance, but today we're really going to break it down. For those of you who have not read Yael's article, I'll pop it onto the screen for you again. From The Intercept, type in revealed massive Chinese police database, and it's very comprehensive report. So I'll get right to our questions. First question is one. We've all heard about people being monitored on social media, basically regardless of wherever you're from. You could be from Australia, like myself, the United States, and other countries. But what's different about China's approach, especially when it comes to the Uyghurs on social media apps like WeChat and Tencent QQ, or any other app for that matter?
That's a really good question, because I have looked a lot at surveillance in the U.S. specifically. And in the U.S., there are some protections. So it might not be as many protections as people would want, but we do have some protections. There's also end-to-end encrypted communication tools like Signal that authorities can't see what you're reading, basically, unless they hack into your phone somehow. Or unlock it. And there's other information that's held by tech companies, and they might comply with a request for data more often than people would like, or maybe judges sign off on warrants for data more often than we'd like. And I think those concerns are absolutely legitimate, but it's totally different beast than what's happening in Urumqi, where your phone is scanned multiple times a day, your movement is being tracked and run against these sort of restricted files and leading to imprisonment. And in the US and in other countries, you might get harassed by police or by the federal government. And again, I'm not at all dismissive of that. That's a big part of what I've covered. But this is just so much more extensive and pervasive and constant. And it's really based on ethnicity, on religion, on familial ties. And the stakes are really high to get put in re-education camps and have your family monitored and surveilled even more than they already are.
So we want to remind our audience that through her investigation, she was able to obtain leaked files, okay, which confirm and provide further details into such things that we've heard about, like cameras being installed in the homes of Uyghurs, the creation of the mass detention camps, children forcibly being separated from their families and placed in preschools with electric fences, the systematic destruction of Uyghur cemeteries, a systematic campaign to suppress Uyghur births through forced abortion, sterilization and birth control. But have you had any response or backlash by the CCP about your report?
I think there's I think before I answer that, I think part of the lead might have been a little unclear because the database that I obtained didn't actually have information on some of those practices. A lot of those we learned about through groups like Human Rights Watch and through other reporting by places like the New York Times, AP, and BBC, and accounts from people that were there and from academics who study the region. But we did reach out. Actually, my editor reached out to China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs for comment and didn't get a response. And I know that the CCP has kind of targeted people that have written these stories or spoken about what happened to them before. And I didn't actually, that has not happened to me yet. I have gotten some backlash through people who it seems are denialists, and they didn't like one of the researchers quoted in the piece because of his religious beliefs. They tried to call his research into question. But it's research on forced sterilization that was corroborated by AP, and it's based on actual Chinese government documents. And so they've been pretty aggressive. And I think it's something people should kind of expect if they do this kind of reporting. And so that did happen. But yeah, so far China, I don't know if it's because there's so many leaks out of the area, they can't target everybody.
I assume this is your first time where you've actually, I'm not sure about the history, but I assume this is the first time where you've sort of quote unquote attacked the CCP on their practices. Perhaps that's why. Whereas I assume you're mentioning Dr. Adrian Zenz here with his research on birth control. And you guys can check that episode out. We've interviewed Adrian Zenz about 6-7 months ago on that specific issue. Yeah, that's probably why, but you'll get there. So in your article, you mentioned something called the anti-terrorism sword. What is that?
So the anti-terrorism sword, it's a tool. Actually, it's actually several types of tools. One of them is called Mea Pico, and the police use it to download the contents of people's phones. And sometimes multiple times a day. Basically, they make you plug your phone into one of these devices, and they exfiltrate your contacts, your text messages, photos, videos, etc. And they check them against a list of prohibited items, and then that information is uploaded into a police platform called IJOP. But one of the things that's kind of disturbing, and we talked a little bit earlier about WeChat, which is used to pay bills. It's a photo app. It's used for texting. So there's just a ton of stuff that it has that the government has access to. Location data, call history. But it's also retroactive. So this is another difference from other countries. Like in the U.S., well, first of all, it's not illegal to join a chat group. But even if it were, it's not retroactively illegal. Like you can't get in trouble for something you did that was legal at the time. And that's what we saw happening in Xinjiang, is that people would join a chat group that was legal at the time. It would become illegal. They wouldn't have been on that group for years. And then, suddenly they're, dealing with these legal repercussions for being on a chat group that was legal at the time.
Yeah, so we've seen this in many cases, whether it be in the entertainment industry or, especially in music or poetry, where things that used to be legal, suddenly the cultural filter got narrower and narrower, and those things no longer became illegal. Or even, for example, performing the pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia, to Mecca, what used to be illegal especially if you were traveling in a group, has now become illegal. So it sort of reflects that.
Yeah, there was a group called I think it was a WeChat group called Quran Alphabet that was legal at the time and then became illegal. And they're like, who was in this group that we now decided is illegal? So it's kind of disturbing.
Yeah. In your article, you say in some cases, it appears that through fixed term sentences, though fixed term sentences were assigned to people in re-education detention, undercutting the idea promulgated by the government that the lengths of such detentions are contingent on rehabilitation or vocational training. Does this mean that even if a detainee is ready for graduation or deemed to be re-educated, that they will not see the light of day?
It's actually kind of the opposite. So before this story and before actually researchers, we had look at some of the data. People thought there was never a set date for detention. Like you just stayed in there until they decided. It was very arbitrary. Like they would just decide, like, oh, you're re-educated now, you can go. And sometimes it wouldn't just be to go home. Sometimes like they'd let you go. You would do like forced labor and then go home in the evenings and weekends and stuff like that. But what we found was that in some instances there were actually fixed terms. So people could be sent home when their term ended, which their families were so grateful for. I think because of the uncertainty. Like I don't think it's even the length of time. Like I think it's because like if you're in prison but you don't know how long, you'd rather know when you get released, even if it's longer. So that was one of the things that we found that seemed. I don't think anybody's written about it before, and people were really surprised to hear it.
I think the sound was lost there for a moment. Is that correct?
Yeah. Do you need me to repeat that last
No, no,
one?
no, 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 no. That's fine. I was basically talking over basically if a lot of these countries had their way, that they would want these measures, that they would want the strength that China has with their surveillance capabilities of how they surveil their people. In the article, you mentioned that applying for asylum abroad can result in being classified as a terrorist as part of an initiative to prevent the backflow of foreign ideas. Could you please highlight what you mean by prevent the backflow of foreign ideas?
Yeah. So in the database, we found evidence of an initiative. I think it's already been written about before. It's called backflow prevention, which is the idea that people who leave China and go to other countries and then return could sort of like pollute the country with ideas, like foreign ideas, or like an outside influence that they saw as negative. And then elsewhere, we saw a report that authorities were referring to people going abroad and seeking asylum as terrorists, which is obviously doesn't meet international. Like it doesn't fit any definition of terrorism. But I think like the reason we kind of compared the two is because it shows that Chinese authorities are keeping detailed records on Uyghurs abroad.
So we can say that the China's surveillance isn't just within their own borders. It's sort of spread throughout the world, whether it be through and we've talked about this on our podcast, whether it be through their international students, their Confucius Institutes, and the list goes on, where international students have to sort of register with the local consulate or the embassy or wherever they are, so that the consulate themselves can keep tabs on those students.
Yeah, and I've heard reports from people that have gotten asylum, but they join these consulate group. Like they would invite them to groups. Like I don't remember what app, but so one time it was Facebook, and then they would like harass them that way. Which is really disturbing.
So one of the software companies or the software that you mentioned is something called Landersoft. Could you please describe who or what Landersoft is and their software, and their software ITAP? The name essentially is perfect in that they tap into people's phone lines, whether it be social media or whatever else. It's literally called ITAP.
Yeah. Landasoft, I think the full name is Shanghai Landasoft Data Technology. And when I looked them up on Bloomberg pretty early on, and it said they're a tech company that designs and develops prepackaged software solutions for data management and analysis, human management, criminal suspects trajectory, and intelligence analysis. And ITAP is the actual software that appears to be behind the database we obtained, and it's a system for big data. And I don't think it's actually ITAP that's tapping into phone lines and social media. I think everything just feeds into it, so it's aggregating this information. And that's kind of the sense we got. There was a lot we couldn't exactly find out, like how it interacts with other police aggregation tools like IJOP. But that was kind of the basic impression we got of what that software actually is.
Yeah, like there's so much going on there that you can't keep track, whether it be the amount of technology, the amount of companies and what they do. And essentially each company has to sort of feed into or feed off and essentially do the bidding of the Chinese Communist Party. In your article, you mentioned that one of the databases, major components, is an extensive collection of minutes from community stability meetings in which de facto police auxiliaries or citizen-staffed neighborhood police. For those who don't know who or what citizen-staffed neighborhood police are, could you please give us a brief explanation?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, we spent a lot of time looking at these meetings. And the way I understand it is that there's volunteers, like citizen volunteers for these neighborhood police meetings. So they're not actually police, but they're citizens, but they can pass this information on to the police, so it feeds into the police system. And we have actually at the bottom of the article, there's translations of some of these documents, but you can see they spend a lot of time reporting on surveillance of people that they think are suspicious. In a lot of detail. The level of granularity in these meetings is really stunning.
And we've talked about this before, where essentially China and even with other former, whether it be communistic states or fascist states, where they turn it into a self-police state or self-governing police state, where if you are not spying, then you yourself could be in trouble for not reporting on others, because your fellow neighbors or your fellow brethren could be reporting on you. And it's just you saw it with the Gestapo, or whether you saw it during the time of the Soviets. So it's just history repeating itself over again.
Yeah, we actually got. It wasn't from the database, but we talked to people who had lived in Kashgar, and they said that like you would actually get in trouble for not basically snitching on people. Like you had like a quota of statements that you had to make, and so you can't really blame people for doing it because they could get in prison for not like doing that. But another thing we saw is that there was people making reports. The government was like, authorities were like, this isn't the type of information we're looking for. Like they're specifically looking for, Muslims, like to target Muslims. So, yeah, they're like,
and just to meet those targets, they could be making up those statements as well. You couldn't really prove one way or another if that was really true or not.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a quota, I mean, I don't have direct evidence of this, but if you have a quota and you need to meet it and you don't have anything suspicious, then yeah, you would make something up, I would imagine.
In the article, again, I urge everyone, I have to repeat myself, to go through that article if you want to know and want to be informed. Already, we have some trolls writing about whether or not, Yael, you yourself have been to Xinjiang. I'm quoting them, and I'll pop up, perhaps, I don't want to give them the promotion, and it's a classic line from the troll saying, have you been there? Have you seen it for yourself? What are you basing the evidence on? And we'll sort of, I'll ask that towards the end. But you mentioned something called Physicals for All program. And I assume this has to do with health, physical.
Yeah, and so the Physicals for All was a biometric collection program where people had to go there and get their faces scanned, give DNA, and get their voice scanned. And if they didn't, they could face fines or have to sort of formally renounce their behavior. And there was a lot of suspicion that it was a source of surveillance, but the government insisted, like, no, 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 this is a health initiative. So one thing our data showed is that it was actually part of a policing program, and they were reporting anything deemed suspicious to security.
Just a reminder for our audience, we interviewed quite a number of occasions former concentration camp detainee Zumrat Dawood, and she, in her testimony to us, told us that before she was actually taken into the camps, that she went to a hospital for a physical, and as Yael has just mentioned, the speech, and she had to read off a script and had to repeat that for hours. Her retina had to be scanned, and just the whole do-over. So that correlates with her testimony as well. Could you explain to us how the surveillance around mosques work? And why would anybody even try to bother going to a mosque anymore? Because one of the main reasons why people have been sent to these camps is because of their religiosity.
Yeah, we found evidence that Chinese authorities were surveilling attendance at mosques. They were keeping track of how many worshippers were residents, keeping tabs on if prayers were done in a way they consider orderly, which means we found out not from the database but from interviews that you have to, if you don't stand upright, if you don't wear a Uyghur hat called a dopa, if you're too relaxed, if you're wearing perfume, if you don't praise the Chinese Communist Party after prayer, they would consider that not done in order. They would do security checks. They're pretty rigid about who's even allowed in the mosque. So we wrote about an example of students who were questioned and held for hours and put on a watch list at their school because they tried to enter a mosque for a funeral. But it was actually illegal for them to enter because they were underage. And yeah, so attendance has really plummeted. It looked like there was a 96% decrease in the number of visits in one mosque compared to the year prior. Though there were a few other factors as well that we wrote about. And we didn't write this, but one of the researchers I spoke with did tell me that, if you're older, you're less likely to be kind of harassed for going to the mosque. As far as why people would do it, I don't really know. I imagine people like throughout history have practiced their religion even under fear of persecution. So I'm guessing that may have something to do with it, but I don't really know.
Yeah. In addition to ordinary citizens, we've sort of touched upon it before. Ordinary citizens spying on each other. Could you please explain what safety units or brigades are?
Yeah. So again, we talked a little bit about how citizens spying on one another are coerced to do so. They can be punished for not reporting somebody. But safety units or brigades are these sort of community groups segmented in groups of 10. So there's 10 households or 10 businesses organized as a brigade, and you get one volunteer from each group, and they'd have to do drills, and one person from each group would respond to calls. And we talked to a researcher who said that in the region, you'd see people marching in formation and doing drills and wearing red armbands to show their affiliation. So he said it was pretty obvious what that was in the region.
You know what? I'm going to enlighten. I'm not sure if this person is, a pro CCP, but I'm just from the questions that she's been asking. And again, this is for your own experience on this. But again, you can address this directly. You'll get a lot of questions like this in the future. One, have you been to Xinjiang yourself? Is your research based on your own experience? Or are the findings based on other sources of information? So I assume this person has not read the article, because if she had read the article, she would know that it comes from Chinese sources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's based on a Chinese police database. But yeah, no, I have not been to China. I've never said that I had been. We spoke to researchers and activists and people that have been there, and I don't think that discredits anything that I've written at all. But I found that people who ask these types of questions, there's always an excuse for not taking what's happening seriously. It's there's always some it's just been sort of systematic character assassination of anybody who is talking about what's actually going on in Urumqi, and I don't think that those concerns are valid. Like I don't think that the value of this research and reporting is any more is affected by the fact that I haven't lived in China.
Yeah, exactly. So one, she's talked to the activists, gotten the research, and the research is from Chinese sources as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the crux of this issue is, well, that question is, Yael, why haven't you been to China? And mainly the answer for that would be, one, you would if you could, right? If they let you have unfettered access. And the way I rebut those sort of questions is, well, one, does say a country who says they don't have nuclear weapons, what do? They open their borders and go, check out, we're giving you unfettered access. And then those countries write a report saying this country is safe, they haven't got any nuclear weapons, and they can prove that to the world, right? So we're saying, prove us wrong. We hope that there is no genocide. We hope that Uyghurs aren't being surveilled and that they're being targeted by race. What do we hope to gain from this? What do you hope to gain from this, Yael? Why bother write this article?
I think it's important for the truth to come out. But we have talked to people. Yeah, no, I think the safety issue, like if you're doing reporting in a country where people are basically being imprisoned for even just using secure messaging apps or for their religion and familial ties, I don't know that it's necessarily a safe place for a journalist to go to try to collect that data. And some of the academics I've spoken with have also don't they're like, oh yeah, we're not going to go back to China just because of safety reasons. So I think that's important. But yeah, it's if you're going to a country and we gave China an opportunity to respond and they didn't respond. But yeah, I think there's a difference between being sort of led into this sort of government propaganda where they're like, here's what we want you to see, and what we say is or isn't happening. And I think that just the sheer amount of evidence, even though people try to deny it and come up with reasons why, come up with excuses why they believe it's not credible. Like this database comes from China. A lot of the reports about forced sterilization come from Chinese sources. So obviously it would be difficult for the Chinese government to lie about its own information. So I think a lot of this is just, it kind of reminds me of like Holocaust denialism, where there's just massive amounts of evidence, and yet people who have a vested interest in denying it will try to come up with a way to convince people that it isn't true, and in these sort of disinformation silos. So I don't take any of it seriously, and I don't think that, I'm sure if I did spend time in China, there'd be some other way they try to discredit me or this reporting.
And also, because of your knowledge and expertise on Chinese surveillance, the moment you ended up talking to any Uyghur, most likely that Uyghur is going to disappear into the camps, or worse, die. And we've seen that recently in the BBC report. Well, there could be worse things than death with the systemic rape, the torture that goes on, sleep deprivation, food deprivation. So that's another issue, is not just for your own safety, but for the safety of Uyghurs.
Yeah, anybody you speak to could be even targeted even more. Absolutely. Yeah. And I try to keep the focus on that, because even though like I think it's disturbing to get emails from people that are in denial, but it's nothing compared to what people in the country are. And I try to remind myself of that every time when I get some email and I'm like, who are these people and what is wrong with them? It's, yeah, that's disturbing, but it's nothing compared to what, Uyghurs are going through in Xinjiang.
Yeah. Is there anything that we haven't talked about today that you feel that we need to bring up to further highlight this issue, to get this message out there, for this to be, tangible to people, and for people to sort of, whether it be spreading the message or taking some sort of action? And I guess, what would your message be to, whether it be lawmakers, policymakers? What would you tell them?
For lawmakers and policymakers, absolutely, I think that this should be taken seriously. I know there's a Uyghur Rights Tribunal that's doing work on collecting and presenting that evidence. And then just for everybody else, there's a Xinjiang victims database that I would encourage people to look at, and it's if you have like if you want to make donations towards this, it's shahid.biz. And it's a pretty amazing collection of people that have been locked up and disappeared. Sometimes people don't know where they are. They're doing really amazing work. So I would kind of want people to take a look at that also. We linked to it in the article, but it's just, it's like a 12,000 word article. So I know it's hard to kind of click on every link, but I would just encourage people to check that out and make a donation. I'm not affiliated with them at all, but I think they're doing really amazing work.
Well, thank you so much, Yael. You've really highlighted what's been going on and what we've known for years. You put it on paper, given us the proof. I've been talking to Uyghurs for the past couple of days, and they really appreciate the work that you've done. And to further highlight China's oppression, not just in East Turkestan, but in Tibet, in Mongolia, Hong Kong, whether it be Muslims, Christians, Jews, any other sort of ethnic or religious group that is persecuted. We understand that the Chinese Communist Party is not just the enemy of the Uyghurs, Tibetans, Mongolians, and freedom-seeking Chinese themselves. And the Communist Party has to basically wake up to this, change their ways, or, as you mentioned, sanctions and bills have to be put in place for them to, act right and be a loyal and proper player in the world, or they have to go. So sort of the last bit I want to mention is that you can follow Yael on Twitter. There's the links are there. There's a link to her biography and the places that she works for. I'm sure she will, I assume she will further her work in this field. Is there any other way that people can reach you, or Twitter's the best way, or how they can follow you and follow your work?
Oh yeah, Twitter's great, and you can also email me. It's yael@yaelwrites.com.
Great, thank you so much. We've got the links. Her Twitter handle is within the video. This is live on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube as well. You guys know what to do. Spread the message. Do what you can. And until next time, everybody. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi